Jeff Jarbabkowski and James Barry were playing video games late into the night on Wednesday, November 17, 2016, in Loxahatchee, Florida. As usual, Jeff was staying at James's house, but that night was different. James had good news for Jeff, news that would free him from a burden that had been weighing him down for months. Outside the house, a car was parked in the street, its engine running. The person inside was peering through James's window. After a while, the figure stepped out of the car and approached the door. James heard the sound and went to confront the intruder. About half an hour later, Jeff was abruptly woken by a noise in the hallway. He saw James stagger into the bedroom, blood flowing from a wound in his neck. Despite his injuries, James managed to tell Jeff to call for help before collapsing. Soon after, James's mother, Nicola Barry, and her partner, Guy Hand, came into the room. Guy attempted to administer CPR while Nicola called 911, but their efforts were in vain. James Barry was already gone. James had been stabbed 7 times, with the fatal wound cutting through 2 arteries in his chest. When the police arrived, Guy and Nicola, having already contacted other family members, including James's biological father, Jim, were present. The authorities immediately noticed the bloodstains everywhere. On the floor, the hallway walls, the bedroom walls, the laundry basket, and even on the bed near where James had collapsed. There was also something strange about the scene. There was no sign of forced entry. Guy had blood on his hands, which could be explained by the CPR, but the police were more concerned with the bloody knife found in the kitchen near the sink. It had James's hair on it, and it appeared as though someone had tried to clean it. Jeff told the officers that he had seen the knife on the floor at one point, but it had been moved. Guy admitted to relocating the weapon out of instinct, but the police were skeptical of this explanation. They took photos of Guy's bloodied hands as evidence and continued their search for more clues. In the back-screened patio, police found a pink cell phone on a table. It was locked, so they would need a search warrant to access its contents. James Barry was born on May 28, 1995, to Nicola and Jim. From an early age, he was a quiet and gentle boy with a soft, freckled face. He had a deep fascination with animals, particularly those considered vulnerable, like reptiles, birds, and butterflies. His sensitivity extended even to bugs, which he would go out of his way to avoid stepping on. He loved catching lizards and tree frogs and developed a deep affection for nature, especially a particular tree, the poinciana. His father would often recall that, when they drove past one, James would ask him to pull over so he could collect the tree's seed pods. This love for animals made James a perfect fit for working at a local pet store called Tank's a Lot in Lantana. At the time of his death, he was transitioning to a new pet store. James had graduated from Seminole Ridge Community High School and was attending Palm Beach State College. He wasn't entirely sure what career path he wanted to take, but was confident that he would figure it out. He was known for being kind, caring, thoughtful, selfless, and intelligent. His family described him as sweet-natured, the kind of person who was afraid to upset others and would always put their needs before his own. Jim once recalled how, while making himself a crunchy peanut butter sandwich, James had asked him to make one for him too. Later, when his stepmother Trish asked James if he liked crunchy peanut butter or preferred creamy, he admitted he liked creamy better but didn't want to hurt his dad's feelings. Jim liked to say that James didn't have a mean bone in his body. James's love for fairness and doing the right thing was reflected in his favorite anime character, Ichigo from Bleach, a character known for his moral compass and sense of justice. James didn't drink, do drugs, or break rules. He focused intently on his studies and adhered to a strict curfew. He was the ideal son and brother, someone who always tried to make others feel comfortable and cared for. The only time James's father ever heard him curse was when he was playing video games, a hobby he greatly enjoyed, often with friends and family. He and Jim communicated almost daily via text. The family had a close-knit bond, regularly staying in touch and taking vacations together. James had a number of interests, including Comic-Con, anime, and greenscape. He was especially fond of the video game League of Legends, where he met many people. His last Facebook update indicated that he was single at the time, though this hadn't always been the case. While investigators focused their attention on Guy Hand, they also had surveillance footage from the night of the murder. At 12:25 a.m., a white Toyota was seen driving on Glasgow Drive, passing by James's home. The vehicle left the residence at 12:52 a.m., a timeline that matched the 911 call made by Nicola. About 50 minutes later, the car's SunPass, a toll road transponder, pinged as it headed north on the Florida Turnpike, exiting in Kissimmee. James's father, Jim, arrived on the scene and immediately suggested that the police speak with James's girlfriend, Melanie Eam, for any possible information. Meanwhile, police put out an alert for the vehicle and traveled to Melanie's parents' home. When they arrived, Melanie's parents told officers that they had been showering when they heard a knock on the door. Melanie's father went to answer it, but by the time he reached the door, Melanie had already driven off. Concerned for her welfare, they informed the police that they hadn't been able to reach her by phone, but that she often stayed with her aunt in Silver Spring, Maryland. The next day, November 18th, the police received a call from Uncle Luke, Melanie's cousin. He informed them that the white Toyota was parked outside his house. Surveillance team was dispatched to a townhouse in Silver Spring, Maryland, a nearly 15-hour drive from Loxahatchee. When the officers arrived and knocked on the door, Melanie answered. She appeared emotionally distressed and started crying. The police weren't sure how to interpret her reaction. At that point, they were unaware of the events that had unfolded at the Barry home and were only conducting a welfare check. Born on May 8, 1996, Melanie Eam had a calm and reserved personality, often quiet in conversation. She was enrolled at Palm Beach State College, where she studied psychology. In her free time, she played League of Legends, a popular online multiplayer game. It was in the world of League of Legends that Melanie met James. Her online alias was Hellraiser, and she and James quickly bonded over their shared love of the game. Their conversations moved from the in-game chat to real life. By the summer of 2014, they decided to meet in person, going on their first date together. James was so excited about Melanie that he immediately told his father, Jim, about her. One of their early dates was at the South Florida Fair, and James even sent his father a picture from the event. Jim quickly grew fond of Melanie, accepting her into the family as one of their own. The love James felt for Melanie was reflected in the way his family embraced her. If James loved her, then so did they. Throughout their relationship, Melanie appeared in nearly every photo and video James shared with his family. She was there at family events, celebrating birthdays with them, and at gatherings, always standing by James's side. Melanie even stayed at Jim's house several times, including during Hurricane Matthew, when James helped install hurricane shutters at Melanie's parents' home. For much of their relationship, Melanie stayed at James's house 4 to 5 nights a week. They were inseparable, it seemed. However, James's sister, Alexandra, had some reservations about Melanie. She found her a bit possessive, particularly when it came to their shared college classes. Melanie expressed a desire to attend college alongside James, a sign of just how deeply she wanted to be part of his life. Melanie's desire to be close to James grew stronger over time. She felt the need to be with him almost constantly, even going so far as to pursue attending the same school. It was as if she needed to be near him all the time. This intense clinginess didn't fit well with James's personality. He was often described as somewhat naive and innocent, and he had a deep trust in others. These traits made for a complicated mix, as it became clear that their personalities weren't exactly a match. It would later be discovered that the phone left behind on the patio table actually belonged to Melanie. After obtaining a search warrant, the police began combing through the device, looking for clues in the messaging apps to see what kind of interactions Melanie had been having with James. It wasn't long before they uncovered a conversation in the League of Legends communications app, where they found a series of messages exchanged between the two of them that same night. In the exchange, James revealed that he had ended their relationship. The text messages gave a glimpse into the dynamics of their relationship, highlighting how much emotional strain James had been enduring. Melanie's messages suggested that she couldn't accept the breakup, as she seemed to need constant reassurance from James that he still cared about her. On the night of his murder, Melanie texted James, "Oh, you forgot about me." She followed with, "Nobody is 100%, you told me that just this morning." James responded, suggesting that it might be better for both of them to separate and focus on their own lives, rather than constantly worrying about each other. "Yes, it's something big for both of us," he wrote. "Are you and me really happy?" Melanie shot back, "You mean waste your time? Thanks for just leaving me through a league chat. I didn't expect this at all." James, visibly drained, replied, "Melanie, I type my feelings better than explaining them in real life. I'm not happy at all anymore. I'm really tired. I'll talk to you in person." For the last few months of his life, James had felt overwhelmed by his relationship with Melanie. Despite breaking up with her before, he found it incredibly difficult to completely sever ties. The relationship was marked by James's aversion to confrontation and Melanie's inability to let go, no matter how much James tried. Approximately 8 months before his death, James ended things with Melanie for the first time. At that point, they had been together for about 9 months. Melanie reacted emotionally, crying and becoming angry, demanding that James give their relationship another chance. But James couldn't bring himself to do it. His kind heart, however, may have kept him stuck in a relationship that was becoming increasingly toxic. One issue that complicated things further was Melanie's jealousy of James's best friend, Jeff. Alexandra, James's sister, suspected that Melanie resented the close bond between James and Jeff. James and Jeff had been best friends since childhood, and Jeff had even been living with James and his family. But Melanie believed that Jeff had influenced James to break up with her, which only fueled her anger and resentment. Rather than letting go of her feelings, Melanie decided to take matters into her own hands. Jeff had a passion for fish and kept an aquarium in Nicola's home. In a fit of rage, Melanie poured half a gallon of bleach into the tank, killing all of Jeff's fish. Her goal was clear: to get Jeff out of the house. The plan worked. Jeff moved out, which caused a temporary strain in his friendship with James. Melanie later admitted to what she had done, showing no remorse or emotion for her actions. Following the breakup, Melanie fell into a deep depression, and according to her parents, even became suicidal. Her mother came to James and begged him to take Melanie back, telling him that she didn't know if her daughter could handle the emotional pain of the split. She even told James that Melanie might not survive the heartbreak. Despite everything, James's heart ached for Melanie. Even though he couldn't take the emotional roller coaster of the relationship anymore, he still struggled with the thought of her being hurt. He sought guidance from his stepmother, Trish, who advised him that if there was something about Melanie's personality or behavior that he couldn't accept, it was unlikely to change. James shared that their relationship had lasted for 9 months, which he considered a long time, though it was far from the longest relationship. But the emotional toll on him was undeniable. James was exhausted by the constant drama and emotional demands, but his gentle nature made it hard for him to walk away completely. James had been trying to reconcile his emotions with his reasoning. If there had been even the slightest coldness in his heart, he might have been able to move on. But James wasn't that kind of person. He had always been kind-hearted and caring, incapable of abandoning someone in distress. His compassionate nature made it impossible for him to fully sever ties. Eventually, he agreed to give his relationship with Melanie another shot, even though his instincts told him it wouldn't improve. Trish's words had been prophetic. Just 3 weeks before his death, James's family began to notice things were seriously off with Melanie. Jim and Trish had bought James his dream car, a Camaro SS. James was ecstatic when they went to pick it up, but Melanie's reaction was noticeably indifferent. She showed no excitement or joy for James, something that struck his family as strange. At the time, they didn't fully grasp the extent of Melanie's issues, but hindsight would reveal how much was wrong beneath the surface. Between 1975 and 1979, Cambodia was the scene of one of the Cold War's most devastating tragedies, the Cambodian genocide. The rise of the Khmer Rouge, led by the notorious Pol Pot, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1.5 to 3 million people, about a quarter of the country's population. Among those who perished were Melanie's grandparents, who were taken by the Khmer Rouge. At the time, Melanie's mother was only 9 years old. Her family eventually fled Cambodia and sought refuge in Washington, D.C., but the trauma of their past followed them. Melanie's mother developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which had lasting effects on her ability to cope with life. According to Melanie's cousin, she struggled with severe mood swings, outbursts, and an ongoing battle with depression. By the time Melanie was 12, she was reportedly sleeping in her mother's room, while her father slept elsewhere. The family dynamic was filled with physical abuse, domestic violence, and emotional turmoil. Although Melanie's cousin shared some of these details, there is little official documentation, as none of the alleged abuse was reported to the authorities. Growing up in such a tumultuous environment left its mark on Melanie. By the time she was 19, she had been prescribed antidepressants, though she wasn't diligent about taking them. Her relationship with James seemed to serve as a way for her to escape the chaos of her home life. Melanie was drawn to the stability and warmth of James's family, as it offered her a sense of belonging. She eagerly integrated herself into James's world, learning his family's routines, spending time in their kitchen, and even taking on domestic tasks like baking. To Melanie, it felt like she had already become part of the family. Her ultimate goal was to marry James and make that family connection official. But as their relationship progressed, it seemed that Melanie began to feel threatened by the possibility of losing James, especially as his family grew more concerned. Jim and Trish speculated that Melanie's indifferent reaction to James's new car was a sign that she feared losing him. The Camaro, which had been a symbol of James's newfound independence, seemed to represent a potential break for Melanie. Jim believed that she feared her control over James was slipping away. At 8:55 p.m. on November 16, 2016, Jim sent a casual text to his son, "What's up?" It was a typical check-in, something they did regularly. However, this particular exchange would soon take on a tragic significance. Jim tried to offer advice, encouraging his son to stay positive and confident in himself. But James was too far gone, exhausted from months of emotional turmoil. This was the last meaningful conversation Jim would have with his son. Jim had always been concerned about his son James. He worried about the relationship James had with Melanie and the toll it was taking on him. The strain was obvious. James was distant, less engaged, and seemed to be carrying a heavy weight. Jim knew something had to change if James was ever going to find happiness again. In a candid conversation, Jim urged James to make a decision for his own well-being. "You've got to make a change," Jim said gently. "I want you to be happy, son." James admitted that the relationship had been hard. He had tried to fix things, to ignore the problems, but the issues were too deep to overcome. The love they had shared had faded, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't repair what was broken. The wounds, he said, were too deep to heal, and it was time to move on. He acknowledged that he hated seeing Melanie cry, hated seeing her plead for him to come back, but deep down, he knew it was over. He couldn't keep going in a relationship that no longer worked. Jim reassured him, "This isn't the first time. You've got this. You'll come out stronger on the other side." James agreed, though the emotional toll was evident. He confided that the hardest part would likely be Melanie's reaction. She would cry, beg him to reconsider, but he was certain this time it was truly over. He had made up his mind. "I know you're strong enough to do this," Jim said, trying to reassure his son as best he could. Their conversation ended around 9:33 p.m., with James feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. But as James settled in for a night of gaming with his friend Jeff, Melanie was far from done. She wasn't ready to let go. Melanie, seething with anger and frustration, climbed into her white Toyota and drove straight to James's house. Her mind was set. She would not let him go without a fight. By the time James was engrossed in his game, Melanie was already on her way. Around midnight, Melanie arrived at the house and parked outside. Jim had speculated that she likely knew exactly when everyone else in the house would be asleep, especially since James often left his blinds open. She might have even known exactly when to strike. It's unclear whether Melanie texted James or simply knocked on the door, but soon enough, she had his attention. He opened the door and let her in, and the two of them began talking. Melanie pleaded with James, trying desperately to convince him to reconsider the breakup. But James stood firm. He had made his decision. He told her it was over. That wasn't the answer Melanie had hoped for. If she couldn't have James, then no one could. Melanie's anger reached its breaking point. She knew the house well, knew where the sharpest knives were kept. The kitchen had a standard block of knives on the counter, but the sharper blades were stored in a drawer within easy reach. It's believed that, when James turned his back, Melanie grabbed one of those knives. The same knife that had been used to make pot roast earlier that evening. The blade would soon be used for something far darker. James was stabbed 7 times. In the back, in his lower left abdomen, in his right thigh, and in his left side. The knife had severed 2 major arteries, and the wounds were fatal. Despite his injuries, James somehow managed to stagger through the hallway to his bedroom before collapsing. In a panic, Melanie fled the scene. She left her phone behind, as she didn't seem to think clearly in the moment. She had no criminal history, and at the time, she appeared confused and remorseful during her initial interview with police. "I didn't mean to do it," she told the authorities, explaining that James had broken up with her, and the situation had spiraled out of control. Melanie's psychologist, Dr. Heather Holmes, described her as emotionally flat. She noted that people who have survived trauma, particularly sexual violence, often develop a coping mechanism where they mentally check out. While this was true in Melanie's case, it in no way excused her actions. Dr. Holmes pointed out that people like Melanie often vacillate between a state of numb detachment and intense, uncontrollable rage. In Melanie's case, the relationship with James had represented an escape from her troubled home life. She had wanted to leave behind the dysfunction of her family to live with someone who, to her, represented stability, love, and a better life. She had sought out James and his family as a refuge. But when James finally chose to prioritize his own well-being, when he decided to end things, Melanie was unable to cope. Her inability to accept the breakup led to her fatal decision. At first, Melanie's confession during the police interview seemed to offer a straightforward account of events, but the defense later tried to have her confession dismissed due to alleged Miranda violations. That attempt was unsuccessful. In the end, Melanie was found guilty of second-degree murder. In April 2019, she was sentenced to 50 years in prison for her actions. Nicola, James's mother, described the pain of losing her son. "I watched my son slip away. Every day I relive that moment. It will stay with me forever," she said, her voice filled with grief. She continued, speaking of how the crime had affected her life. "This loss has impacted everything. My heart, my trust in people, my sense of humanity. This shattered my beliefs. I can't even sell my house because of the memories. It's a constant reminder of what happened." James's sister, Alexandra, struggled immensely with her brother's death. When she received the call that he was gone, she collapsed in shock. "I couldn't stop crying," she said. "It felt like my world had ended." Her mental health took a sharp decline after the murder. She battled severe depression, panic attacks, and even thoughts of suicide. Alexandra had already been dealing with the trauma of an abusive relationship that James had helped her escape. "This crime has completely shaken my beliefs," she explained. "It's destroyed my ability to trust others, and it's even made me question my faith." Despite the overwhelming grief, Alexandra channeled her pain into something positive. She realized there was a lack of support for those affected by violent crime, so she started a group called Siblings of Murdered Siblings. The group aimed to raise awareness about domestic violence, including its impact on men, and help others who had suffered similar tragedies. Thank you for listening to this story, which was based on both primary and secondary sources. Special thanks to the reporters who continued to cover the case and to everyone who engaged with this story. Please, be kind, help those in need, and remember not to let hatred consume you. Don't be like Melanie Eam. Goodbye.